Decline is all around us, and anyone with open eyes can see it. The myth of linear progressive history is dead, and the civilizational winter begins to chill us to the bone. But what is not clear is why this is the case, and why it's all been so sudden. Is this really the result of incomprehensible incompetence, or is a far more sinister plan at work? It is my belief that decline is not simply some accident, but a deliberate effort to weaken the bodies and minds in our nation to the point of total submission and compliance. Watch this to understand why. This is architected decline, why the regime deliberately retards us. I suppose to start this video off I should explain where the inspiration for the video came from. A couple of weekends ago I was spending time with some very switched on people in Devon who insisted that all of the malicious policies of the regime, of the government or whatever have you, are an effort to destroy our nation, to kill our people, essentially just to totally get rid of us. And whilst there is some merit to this, perhaps in the long run, I think this actually misdiagnoses what the actual intentions of the regime are. You see, unlike most people, I tend to not put too much weight on any emotional incentive of the regime, of the ruling elites, of the ruling factions, or whatever have you. Now, of course, I'm not totally denying that there is some level of ideology or emotion involved. I think, in some cases, clearly, especially in the lower elites, clearly that is the case. But at the top level, with the actual people making, planning, and implementing the policies, I don't think these people are acting emotionally or ideologically, and I don't think they simply want to destroy us. Rather, actually, I think it's something far worse. Now, to understand the argument I'm going to make in this video, one really first ought to understand who is in power, how they came to power, the history of these people, so on and so forth. For the sake of avoiding the Eye of Sauron, I'm going to assume that most people watching already know which faction is in power, their history, how they came to power, and, stuff like the structure of the global American empire. In case you aren't familiar, I provide these various resources to make yourself familiar, and please do check them out in your own time. But yes, for those who are caught up to speed, I am saying that most of the policy is driven by the largest faction in power, and that faction is, the 4x2s, the you-know-whos. Also important to note, though I shan't be going into the specifics in this video, is that, yes, observably, our nations are being slowly destroyed, suppressed, our cultures weakened, we are in decay, and this is weakening the peoples of European descent. They are the ones being weakened, not only abroad, but primarily in our own lands, and I believe the regime knows about this, is complicit in this, and actually encourages this and wants this. So why might the you-know-whos want to slowly destroy the European-descended nations, and what actually is their plan? First of all, you see, I don't necessarily think that the plan is to totally eliminate the ethnically European populations from the world. I see plenty of right-wing Zionist containment figures talk about how the birth rate is too low and that we need to raise it up. To clarify, I'm quite sure that if the disappearance of the ethnically European stock did happen, then those elites would be perfectly happy with this, but I don't think that's their actual plan. I think rather they have something else in mind. So what do they have in mind? Well, the thing to bear in mind is the history of, the ancestors of those elites with the ancestors of the Europeans. Repeatedly throughout history, and most famously in Weimar Germany, those elites were doing many things that were destroying the culture of the Germans. And it wasn't just Germany, it's happened in many other countries in many points throughout history, and each time the you-know-whos have been exposed for doing what they're doing, the retribution was very heavy. Indeed, exile would have been a mercy. Now, to give the emotionally detached, value-free analysis, the argument could be made in all of those cases that those elites, perhaps with some exceptions due to religion or whatever have you, those elites were just following the incentives that were before them, but their incentives come at the expense of the host nations, and it's once the host nations realise what's going on that they try to remove the damage being done to them. But in any case, everyone is just following their incentives. I make this point to clarify that I believe what's happening now, today, is, a repetition of what's happened before. Those elites are following the incentives that lie before them. That's all they're doing. They're just following the incentives. But these incentives, the incentives, primarily of, money, capitalism, power, or whatever have you, these incentives come at our expense as, European nations. You see, the problem for these Middle Eastern elites is that they are a very tiny minority in host countries of far larger populations. In many ways, power is zero-sum, so the power of the highly organised you-know-who minority comes at the expense of the native peoples, and then their incentives for power are to have all the power themselves and diminish the power of their rivals. This may sound harsh, but ultimately, the game is the game, that's how it's played. Arguably, you'd be a fool to play it any other way, especially if you were such a small minority in far larger host countries. But, regardless of all that, there is still the issue of, eventually being found out, which has already happened, and then the native peoples, once woken up to what's really happening, organising themselves to kick out the threat, kick out the foreign power faction that is destroying them. So in this sense, I think the you-know-whos have a very well-founded fear of horrific retribution from the European peoples, and thus the you-know-whos, not wanting to face this horrible outcome again, have organised and schemed and implemented policies to utterly contain and weaken the native European peoples. So out of this well-founded fear of retribution, those elites seek to utterly diminish the power of his adversaries, the native peoples of Europe, by plying them with vices, feeding them with slop, dulling their senses, removing their reasoning, feeding them false narratives about the world and themselves, and thus retarding their ability to fight for themselves and their people, instead creating weak, compliant, miscegenated shells of men, simultaneously ghettoized and feminized. Of course, there are many ways in which this can be done, and, we see them all. The first can be explained through an analogy of a rivalry between shepherds. Any intelligent shepherd will naturally try and breed the best of his flock together, the best rams and the best ewes, and thus the flock remains strong and grows stronger over time. If, however, the shepherd permitted his sheep to breed freely with one another, then surely the only outcome that would happen is that you would have over time a marked gradual degradation of the quality of his flock, such that within a few generations they would be far diminished from their previous good standing and good genetics. And then the other thing is that when you have thoroughbred sheep, they have specific combinations of genetics that make that sheep the best sheep it can be, the one with the best genetics. If, however, you mix good quality thoroughbreds of one type with good quality thoroughbreds of another type, the combination of genetics that occurs between the two will result in an inferior quality sheep. And so what do we see today? There is a de facto reality of those of lower genetic quality breeding more than those of higher genetic quality, and there is an encouragement of a mix between peoples of different thoroughbred types together that create mixes that, in a very harsh Darwinian struggle for survival simply wouldn't make it, but, with modern medicine, these people can, stay alive and spread their own genes further and further on. But yes, the point here is that there is an observed marked degradation of the genetic quality of, especially the peoples in the Western world. Then another way, of course, is what's known as Dysthenics. Dysthenics means bad environment. People are constantly given easy access to brain rot content, to, goy slop food, your McDonald's, your KFCs, unhealthy crap, addictions from this, that and the other, the mobile phones, so many things, and even chemicals, the SSRIs, the pill, and plenty of other things. There are plenty of chemicals which, not to sound like a total schizo and kook, but it's not inconceivable that this is having a marked effect on society and creating a dysthenic environment that leads people to be weaker and weaker. Over time, observably, we can all see that people are getting weaker, fatter, lazier, less healthy, doing less exercise, less competent, less intelligent, and so many other things wrong with them. Yet, arguably, it suits the certain elites who are accused of manufacturing this to put the populations in that state, such that these populations become weaker and weaker and less able to fight back once the desire to fight back eventually arises, which I believe it has started to already and shall continue to do. And then, of course, lastly, the lowest hanging fruit is propaganda. People, pretty much from birth, with the earliest children's books and TV shows, essentially to death, are given a totally doctored narrative of history, lies about themselves, who they are, how they got here, what they should care about. You know, people are told to be individualistic and accepting of minorities coming into their country. They're told to be meritocratic instead of having a preference for their own. They're told that doing these things are good, that it's okay to be, you know, a degenerate in the streets of Brighton or, you know, whatever have you. People are totally and utterly psyoped and contained. People do not get a chance to observe reality for themselves. They are instead already filled with preconceived notions of what's good, what's bad, what is and what isn't, and it's a spell from which most people will never wake. Naturally, a smart fraction must remain to keep the lights on, to keep things running, you know, to keep the machines in operation. And I spoke of this in my video, The Conservative Given, based on Scrump and Evelyn's Substack article, The Conservative Given. But yes, there needs to be a smart fraction to keep the lights on, and even for the rest of the population, they must be kept around to remain productive in their servile capacity as sheep, because this is the incentives of the people in power. This is, you know, capitalist incentives. This is how you create and extract wealth. A total societal collapse would not suit the elites of this country or of the global American empire itself, because essentially they need slaves to do the work, create the wealth, and create luxury lifestyles for themselves. They need people to do that, and that's why I personally reject the idea that it is just about eliminating these people. No, it's not about eliminating us. It's about keeping us as servile, subdued, submissive, pathetic, feminized, ghettoized, you know, controllable, containable slaves, basically. We are far more beneficial to the you-know-whos as, you know, Shabos slaves than as dead men. But yes, even the smart fraction, the people who are capable of higher thought, these people must be kept around, but they must never be allowed to become a threat to the you-know-whos, so they must be contained, they must have their power taken away, they must be sold lies about liberal democracy and capitalism and the American dream or whatever have you. And, you know, with that comes a little bit of risk. There will always be a level of dissidence, but at the same time, when I look at the reality on the ground, I do not see any realistic, plausible threat to the regime as it stands. Even the people, the very smart people who understand exactly what's going on and are telling you what's going on and are organising to do whatever they can to, you know, carve out their own power and potentially even take back power entirely, I don't see any realistic chance of that happening, not just in my lifetime, but in the lifetime after. We are so contained and subdued and powerless and pathetic that I just don't see it happening. And so I believe that the regime is, you know, always a little bit nervous about this level of dissidence, but ultimately comfortable with the idea that they are secure in their own power, that the majority have no idea what's going on, are too weak and cowardly to ever fight back, and thus the regime will go on as it has been. Things will keep getting worse. The three ways in which I said they are removing our power will continue. We will become further muttified, propagandized, and subjected to dysthenic environments, to slop and chemicals and addictive signals from your phone and so on and so forth. That will all continue, but there will be enough of a productive servile population that the elites can, over time, populate more and more, build more power for themselves. There'll be enough of a productive class that they can have luxury lifestyles, they can go on their luxury yachts and their Epstein Islands, whatever else it is they want to do. They will be able to do that because there is still a productive class of weak cattle, but even weak cattle are better than no cattle. So yes, essentially that's what I think's going on. It's not about trying to remove us from the planet or anything else like that, although I don't think they particularly mind if that did happen. Rather, more so, it's to subdue us, prevent us from ever being a threat and rising up against them, which, is a well-founded fear for them because, anyone who understands what's being done to them would rightfully feel the urge to remove those in power who are doing this to them. It's a well-founded fear. But yes, I think I've said my piece. That's my theory. That's what I think's going on. Let me know what you think in the comments, if you agree with this. Arguably a case can be made that that's only one factor among many, and that there could be ideological motives, there could be emotional incentives, they might want revenge or whatever have you. But yes, let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you like this content, then please like and subscribe. And, do the best for yourselves, do the best for your family, do what you can. I hope to see you in the next one, but until next time, cheerio.